In three, two, one, we're live.
Welcome to the Zero1 podcast. I'm Harper and I'm here with
Miller.
Miller. For those who are new, who are you?
I'm a game developer. And who is Harper?
I'm a self proclaimed marketing guru. Simply put, that's who we are. And this is our brand, the Zero1 podcast. And the reason I say this is our brand is because today we're going to be talking about brands. Right now, especially with how the world is, I think we have an opportunity to slow down. So I started noticing things I usually don't, which is quite trippy. And I went to the grocery store, and outside there was some firewood, and it had a nice, elaborate packaging, which seemed unnecessary, but it had a logo and a design, and the name of the brand was Firebrand Firewood. What are your thoughts on that, Matt?
I like it because it's so upfront.
There is absolutely no doubt in my mind what firewood brand firewood is. I will give it that. Have you seen any brands lately that you were maybe struck by or noticed a little differently?
Nothing as obvious as firebrand firewood. I live in the digital world, so a lot of times I'm always getting shoved with Google and Microsoft in my face. So I see
Right.
the big juggernauts all the time.
And you had some recent experience with branding yourself, right?
Yeah, for my personal gaming company, it was branded as Me Games, and I've recently rebranded it to Me First Games. And we can get into that later, but there's some reasons why I needed to change it.
Okay, yeah, I definitely want to hear the story behind that. Well, let's jump into branding, and I think the only place we can start is the beginning. And a quick Google search will tell you that branding started, as you might expect, a very long time ago. And it started in ancient Egypt, from what many scholars believe. And it all started with people marking their livestock, hence the name branding. So big surprise there, right? Where we get the name branding from. But that was like the OG branding. You'd have a little design on your hot iron, and then you just mark your animal, and then you got Miller brand sheep running around the countryside.
Oh, that sounds great. So it started just as a simple marking, and then eventually people started elaborating and making more uh, unique brands for themselves.
Yeah, and I think it really started taking off. At least my favorite example is the Romans influenced the British people into creating signs outside of their inns, which oftentimes were also pubs.
Hmm.
So we have all these beautiful examples of signs in the UK of really simple names because it was two pictures put together. For example, you could have a pub named the Rose and Key, and everyone would know if we were going to meet at the Rose and Key, we'd look for the sign with the flower and the door opening device.
Okay, so yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then I guess since then it's kind of blown up into all these different things along with technology.
Yeah, it's certainly morphed into something completely different, but I think the heart of it is still the same. If I need to know where to get a beer back in the day, I had to know where the inn sign was or what the inn sign represented. And today, if we need to get something, we still need to know where to find it.
Yeah, I feel like back then it'd be a lot easier to come up with a unique brand for your business.
Yeah, it was uncharted territory back then. Absolutely. What do you think if you had a pub and you were basing it off of old English naming styles? What would yours be called?
Well, I'd like to use my last name, Miller, but I'd get sued out of the wazoo right now. But so I'd have to think of something else. Like if it's not a Miller, then it'd be, I don't know, a harvester, because something related to manual labor.
There you go.
Yeah.
And if I use my last name, which is would be like a harp, I'd also get sued because I think that's Guinness's actual logo is like a harp.
Okay, but you could still call yourself Harper. You just couldn't use a logo.
Yeah, I don't think we should be opening up any pubs anytime soon.
No, I don't brew my own beer anyway, so it's okay.
As I was searching, I found my. Excuse me, my voice is cracking there. As I was searching, I found my favorite sign, which the C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien met there. It's the eagle and the child, and there's a sign, and it's just an eagle carrying away a baby, and it looks awesome and hilarious.
That's a good one.
You definitely wouldn't forget where to meet if it was there that we were meeting. So, one of my bucket list items definitely to check out the eagle and child one day and sit where they sat. Well, let's fast forward a little bit to modern day, and let's talk about brands in general. And when you think of a brand, I want to know what's the first brand that comes to your mind.
The first brand that comes to my mind is Apple and Google. I'm always dealing with them, so they're always on my mind. And it just seems like they're everywhere now. And like I can imagine like some brands in my mind. Like I can imagine the Coca-Cola brand. I can imagine Apple brand. I can imagine Google. I can imagine Nike. I can imagine Starbucks. All these brands you see all the time, and you can just instantly recall them in your head.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that. I think, as you mentioned, you can visualize it, and I think that's what a good brand does is it takes an abstract concept and it makes it concrete within your mind, and that's really what the essence of a brand is. It helps you to evoke emotions and ideas just through the name or through a logo.
Hmm. So it makes sense why they're so important because it's a way to identify something you want to sell or some who you are or a service that you have.
Yeah, and a lot of times, especially with good brand names or very popular brand names, we don't even think that we're looking at a brand or talking about a brand because it's so seamless. It's just something that's natural to us.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like when I see the brand for Coca-Cola, I don't really think of a soda company or even their brand. I'm thinking about the flavor of their product.
And you can almost taste it, right? I mean, before you even take that first sip, when you see that red and white logo, you start to imagine what it is.
Yeah, exactly. That'd be a good diet plan if you just can sit and imagine flavors and not actually drink it.
That would be very nice. And sometimes these brands like they take a color, and a color can just be so iconic that you don't even need to see the words. You can just see some cursive in the example of Coca-Cola, some cursive writing on a red background, and it could say like "kick me," and if you didn't look twice or look closely, you might still think it says Coca-Cola just because it's such a recognized brand.
Yeah, it's like you don't notice the details. You just glance at it, and instantly the pattern recognition goes straight to that because you've seen it so many times. It's kind of scary, actually.
It is, and that's genius marketing, in my opinion. Is just and for those established brands, it's something that takes a lot of time, a lot of
Hmm.
effort. How many Coca-Cola commercials have you seen? How many Coca-Cola bottles have you seen? It's not something that happened because the brand's so good. It's something that happened because of your constant immersion and experience with the brand.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so when it comes to these brands we recall, obviously they're going to be good brands, and that makes me wonder, like, what comes to mind when you want to choose a good brand, or what goes into making a brand really good. Like when we talk about the details of it, is it just logos? Is it the color? Does it have to be unique? What do you think about that?
Well, I want to start by saying I don't think that we're all marketers, expert marketers, but everyone is good at knowing a bad brand when they hear or see one.
Hmm.
So you don't have to be an expert to know something's bad. If you've ever ran into a poor brand name, you'll smell it like a rotten fish. So it is very important not to completely fail, and it is the essence of what people are going to bring up as they recall what you do. So what makes a good brand? To answer your question now, I think it can fall in a couple categories. When it comes to branding, it can be something simple that describes what you do. So firebrand firewood
Hmm.
is a perfect example of that. Even though I hate the name, I'm not going to forget it, and never going to be confused about what they provide. So if you're coming up with a company or a book or an idea, that would be the low hanging fruit, which isn't always super easy to do, but produce a simple idea of what you do. Even though I think your name's a little more creative than fire firewood brand. Um, I think of your brand name as an example of that. You have games in your brand name, so people know what your brand's about already. Can you tell me a little bit maybe about how you selected your brand when you went to it?
Yeah. Well, have you ever been playing a game and you heard like kids yelling like "me first, me first"?
Yeah.
That's where it came from. So when I started my company, I called it Me First LLC, and my intention was that I could brand it as Me First or Me First Games. And then when I was thinking about like trimming the fat from it, I was like, what if I stripped the first and I just called it Me Games? So ME Games, Me Games. And so I did that for a while, but I ran into some problems. Just when it's in the lowercase text form, like for handles and stuff. So it'd be like Me Games with no spaces and all lowercase. And
Hmm.
when it's like that, people read it as Me, Mega Me. And so even
Hmm.
though like I really, really still like Me Games, I like it more than Me First Games. It's just that scenario is causing issues where people aren't reading the name correctly. So I had to basically ditch it. And so I went back to my original plan, which is Me First or Me First Games. And the thing about my brand, what I want to do is I want people to recognize the Me First, but the Me First Games, the games is kind of there at the end. And I don't think I'm going to cut it away, but the important part is the Me First. That's why I want people to or recognize. So.
That's awesome, man. I actually got a little bit of the chills when you were telling me. I didn't know that story. I'd never actually asked you that. Thank you for telling us about it. So that idea of being a little kid and saying me first is such a nostalgic idea to me. So that makes a lot of sense and represents what you're doing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's actually I'm going to be recording some sound effects for the logo of the game when you boot up my games. So you see my Me First Games logo, and then you'll hear little kids say "Me First, Me First."
I like it. I can't wait for that. So me first, awesome brand name. I like it a lot. I like it even more now that I know the story. Falls into that category of explaining what you do. I think the other category that brands often fall into is something memorable. So you can create a brand name that's difficult to remember. So if you have a last name that's not common in the area that you are going to be representing or selling your product, unless it's easy to say or memorize, might not be the best brand name. But there's also common things that in popular culture that you can invoke and make a memorable brand name. So what comes to mind for me is Starbucks. We It seems silly to talk about Starbucks needing to do any branding now, but at one point they were just a simple coffee company on Pike's Place Market in Seattle, and the founders came up with the name Starbuck, which is actually after a character in Moby Dick, and their logo is a mermaid. So it kind of played off that Seattle near the sea vibe, and had that
Hmm.
literature tie-in that a lot of people in coffee shops, especially in the '90s, might be drawn to.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's pretty cool. But so their brand Starbucks, I mean, it's still like it's following the previous rules too. It's something you can easily say. It's not too many syllables. It's not too weird because it's two words that people are going to identify.
Yeah, it's familiar, especially I think to their core demographic back then. So it's something that people can relate to. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I think there's odd names. And again, I'm just going to use the big example out there, which is Google. Google's a made up word, which came for the founders were sitting in a room and they were talking about large numbers, and Google is a spelled it, and they really liked it, so they started using that as their brand, which is really mean, and kind of has that nerd association. But it's odd and easy to remember, and it's definitely different than anything else that was out there at the time. So Google had its own little market based off of its brand name.
Yeah, and the game industry is full of a bunch of brands with weird names, especially when they might not be weird in, let's say, Japanese, but over here they're foreign, like Square Enix, Konami, Nintendo. Even kind of strange. So there's a whole bunch of interesting names in the gaming industry too. It seems like there's ways of overcoming that and making it special if your content is good enough.
And yeah, it all comes down to that. I mean, if you have a good enough product, it doesn't matter how bad your brand name is. You're gonna be remembered. And I'm not saying that Nintendo's a bad brand name, but like you said, here in it took some time for us to Nintendo was, and to be able to pronounce it correctly. But now everyone in America knows how to say it.
That's so true. So, that makes me wonder like, obviously, brands are important, but how important are they really?
Well, like I said, I think if you have a good enough or innovative enough, and it's accessible to people, it's it's not the end of the world, but it is for most products, for most small businesses, for most books, most creative properties. You're not going to have that benefit of the doubt. People aren't going to take the extra time to give you that second look. So I think for the majority of businesses out there, or creative products out there, it's essential.
Yeah,
It's something that stands out and represents your brand.
and like you said, Google and Nintendo, I mean, they basically had very special products that they were selling that were different from other things. So even though their branding names are unique and maybe a little bit odd, maybe it could have been to a detriment. We'd never know.
Absolutely, that's true. So you were mentioning a little bit about some of the odd or unfamiliar major game properties, I guess we'd call them. Um, do you have any examples, more specifically with your games, of product names, how you a name for a game,
Hmm.
and if you had to change one, why you had to change it.
Yeah, it's pretty hard for a small developer like me to get a game name that you want. A lot of times you'll find small games that are already exist or something that's trademarked, and you just can't use it. So I was
Hmm.
working on Star Impact. It's called Star Impact now, but originally it was called Red Matter. And at the start of the development time, I looked up the trademark and it didn't exist. Nobody was using it. There was no game called Red Matter, and Red Matter was from the Star Trek movie. It's like this little ball of matter, and they send it to the center of a planet, and it
You're
creates
nerd.
a black hole. Yep, nerding out. So I did a little spin off of that and created a 2D platformer sci-fi adventure with a background story based on that Red Matter. So the game was called Red Matter because that's what you're collecting. And then another game came up and swooped up the name and took the trademark within months. And so I had to rename the game to Star Impact. And uh, even though originally I didn't have Star Impact in the story, I was able to fudge it in there somehow, like the warp drives, even though they're running on red matter, the effect is called Star Impact. So that kind of sucked, but it's something I just dealt with and worked around.
So that's an example of maybe a worst case scenario when it comes to naming something where you have the right name and then last minute you had to call audible. When it's a more regular naming process, branding process, what how do you know when you have the right name? What does it feel like?
Uh, uh, Dang it. I think you're breaking up again.
Am I really?
Like, I didn't hear. What was the last word you said?
What does it feel like? I said it weird though.
Oh, damn it.
I was like, what does it it sounded like I was gonna keep going and then I just stopped.
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought it just like you got cut off and like you were
No.
saying something. And I was like, oh, I wonder how much he's saying. We should keep this in. Let's keep this in the podcast. The listeners need to know what it's like being in quarantine.
Okay,
This
okay.
is real life.
I'm gonna ask you that question again like a normal person would ask it.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the worst case scenario of what happened with Star Impact, where you had to call an audible at the last moment. So when you're naming something, branding something on a more regular process, what does it feel like, and how does it look? Do you know when you have it?
In my experience, yes. The way you describe that process where you're not stressed and scrambling, it's much more fun and way easier. It's like a process of discovery and trying to figure out what matches the game. So I'm working on a VR horror game that's actually an early release called Dead Scope, and we were searching for a name. And in the game, you're grabbing these binoculars and looking through it, and it's kind of like this magic scope. And we needed to find a name for it, and eventually came up with the name Dead Scope, which is kind of perfect because there's these zombies and monsters walking around, the living dead and demons, and you're looking through some kind of visual device like binoculars or a scope. So we finally came to the finals were Demon Scope and Dead Scope, and Dead Scope just came off the tongue a lot easier, and we didn't have to worry about scrambling at that point. There's nothing like that in the gaming world in terms of trademarks. So, I mean, when we found Dead Scope, it felt really good. It felt like the perfect fit for the game that we were making.
Yeah, that's good. I think as a marketer, I'll break that down for a second. I think that is a good name. Demon, if you were to go with demon scope, especially in like Western culture, is kind of a loaded word. So that might have kind of been why I didn't feel quite as right. You know, maybe if we were in another country, it would have been a little more related to general horror themed games and things like that. But as soon as someone sees dead in a game name, they're going to know that it's horror based. And then I love the cleverness of scope because it's such a big part of your game. That is when someone sees the trailer for your game and they're like, "Hey, what's that game with the thing, the scope that you look for the scary things?" They're going to be like, "Oh yeah, Dead Scope," because it makes perfect sense for what you were trying to do there.
Yeah, that point you brought up, we actually talked about it. Where demon wouldn't be well received. The third option was demon and binoculars, but so
And that sounds like almost like a translation from like another language.
yeah, it would be fun if it was like a joke game where it's that's all you do is look at demons from afar in binoculars. That might be a good game idea, actually.
A bad translation. You're visiting another country and reading through an instruction manual, and they're like, and then you must use your demon binoculars to see the dead.
Yeah, just make the names completely literal, the literal actions you're taking in the game.
I'm gonna the cooking game we talked about a couple episodes back. We could call that like cooking, not in real life because it's a virtual reality game. I don't know. I'm just saying we could team up on that, Matt. Cooking, not in real life.
Cooking while wearing VR headsets.
It's the Firewood brand of games.
Oh yeah. Well, you might not forget the name then, though.
You would definitely not forget it. And we did have to come up with a name for the podcast, and we kind of ran into a similar situation with already having some existing intellectual properties out there. Initially, we were 101, and now we're just the 01.
Mm-hmm. And I think I like Zero1. It's a little bit more. It's kind of grown on me. I don't know about you. It just it's a little easier to say.
Yeah, I agree, and it was a process of us kind of bouncing ideas off each other in order to come up with something that people would remember and something that would be easy to find. Hopefully, once we get everything up and running, the initial concept behind the 101 was kind of a clever play on your programming knowledge and the, I guess, content you bring to the podcast, where programmers or anyone that's seen the Matrix would know any series of ones and zeros is kind of computer language. I might be way off there. You can correct me if I am.
Yeah, binary. So
Binary.
you're right on target, man. Don't worry
Yes,
about it. Yeah.
nailed it. And I come from a digital background where results from searches is everything. And having the number one in our title, I thought, especially as the actual numeral, made a lot of sense because we could come up first in search results.
Yeah, we would be the Amazon for our little market.
But now we're last because we have a Z. So, whatever.
Yeah.
It works all the same.
Are there any good brands that start with a Z?
Yeah. I think the one that comes immediately to mind is Zapatos, which isn't quite as popular now, but they were looked at before Amazon as kind of the number one customer-based digital company in the world, because they had such awesome customer service and they treated their employees well. And in a time where people weren't shopping online, you could get shoes online, try them on. If they didn't work, you could return them. But Zapatos is Spanish zapato for shoes. So
Oh, cool.
it works. It's a name for a shoe, and easy to say, easy to remember. So maybe we'll be the same one day.
All right, we do have pretty good customer service.
A+. We've never missed a response. And I think that kind of brings us to the last thing that we'll probably touch on, which is branding in the new age, branding in the future. So it's not good enough anymore just to pick a clever name, but you also have to consider how your name's going to play on digital space as people look for you online.
Okay, well, what exactly does that mean for a engineer or other people who are like me who aren't marketing masterminds?
Well, love it or hate it, Google is pretty much everything when it comes to being found online. There's two ways you can affect Google. One is if you have the deep pockets, you can buy ads and you can show up for search results, which is often referred to as search engine marketing or SEM. On the other end, there's organic side, which is often called SEO or search engine optimization, and that's showing up organically for search results. A modern example of this actually is a recent movie, which is streaming on TVs everywhere now, which is Birds of Prey,
Hmm.
which got renamed to Harley Quinn or The Fabulous Emancipation of Harley Quinn. Um, so originally they were just going by the name of Birds of Prey, but the search engine value was so poor on that name that other sites and people were actually having difficulty finding the movie. So
Mm.
they had to kind of pull a 180, and they realized they had a pretty strong brand in Harley Quinn, being a really popular comic character and having the Suicide Squad movie released a few years back, and it was a little too late in the game, but they changed the name to play off of the SEO quality that they had for the Harley Quinn name.
Wow, that's I didn't know that. That's insane. So they basically were trying to use Birds of Prey, it wasn't working, and then they just switched the name.
Essentially, I mean, they kept Birds of Prey in there, but they tried to be slick about it and be like, yeah, we meant to do this the whole time, but yeah, they did an audible and changed up the name a little bit on the name of the movie there. So, I mean, that's one of the things that as people are naming movies now, as directors are coming out with blockbusters, it's not just good enough to be artistic or have a simple name. They're actually having to consider how is this going to play on Google.
Hmm. Yeah, that's crazy. It, so the Google SEO, the search engine, like how often are people changing names of movies and stuff like that just because of the results aren't working out?
Right. So I think it's probably going to get a little more common, but by the time it hits our ears or eyes, most of the time, we're not going to see a lot of names, whatever they ended on. That we're not going to see names of brands and products changing all the time. But in the early stages, I think it's very common. And as someone who's coming out with a product, it's something you definitely have to consider now.
Yeah. And it's not obvious that Birds of Prey wouldn't perform well either. So I guess it is. It's just like anything else. You have to try it and hope for the best.
Yeah, and one thing I think for smaller brands or more niche products is um, there's a lot of localization in Google now. They've kind of recognized that we're not all multi-million dollar companies. There's a lot of little guys that are just as relevant to somebody searching in our town. So Google actually emphasizes location quite a bit. So if you're opening up a restaurant, you don't have to be worried about coming up with a name that's gonna rank nationally. Google will recognize you're a local company, and when hungry people are searching online, um, they're going to be able to find you a little bit easier. So you can rest a little bit easier knowing that there is some of that in consideration when people are or when Google's giving results online.
Yeah, and I noticed that the search optimization isn't just limited to Google searches. It's like the YouTube search algorithm does it, and the Twitch streamer algorithm does it. So there, and people will offer services for optimizations on these different platforms, just so you get searched better.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Google, I probably oversimplify things. Just, if I was going to start anywhere, it would be on Google. But you're right. There's so many other ways people can find you. Even though YouTube is a Google product, it is the second biggest search engine in the world. And then, of course, there's Bing. There's all these specific platforms where search is going to come into play, like Twitch, if you're a gamer or someone producing content. Um, so there is a lot more that goes into it. What are some of the things, I guess, outside of Google, YouTube, as a marketer for your products that you've used or had to consider?
Well, I'm on all the social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok. Those, I don't have a very good handle on search optim. Oh gosh, drop the whole computer, break it. I don't have a great handle on search optimization in those. They're a little bit different because it's more like focusing on hashtags and getting people to your page. But when it comes to Steam, for example, Steam curation, that's the Steam store where you can buy games on the computer. They have things you can do to optimize on your search so that you have the correct tags, and then people misspell your name. You can appear when people are trying to search for your game. So there's a little bit of that going on in the game industry.
Definitely. And as we're talking about the future of marketing, I think that's where it's at. I mean, brands are going to need to consider how well you show up on these social media platforms. And there might be people listening to this thinking, well, I don't own a brand or I'm not a brand. But likely you're trying to influence people in some capacity. And if you want to do that at a high level, you got to consider what your brand is and whether that's the product brand name of the video or the content you're putting out, or the subject line in the communications that you're putting out. Branding is still everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. You want to be able to have your brand marketed and identified on all the platforms. So, and it feels like maybe SEO is a little like more traditional at this point compared to like trying to get recognized on TikTok or Instagram. I mean, there's just so many different mediums, but like it seems like these big brands they figure it out and they get on there anyways.
That's a really good point. It's funny to think that SEO is kind of old school at this point, even though it's in many senses, looking at media as a whole, still in its infancy. Um, but social media is the future, and it's constantly evolving. And not only are brands doing really really good job, but there's younger, smarter kids out there that are figuring out branding and how to get people to watch their content better than I can do right now.
Yeah, I definitely see that on there too. These kids, they're just getting people to. They're like, was it self branding? That's what it's called, right?
Yeah.
And they're doing great jobs at it.
What's been something that's stood out? We talked about TikTok a little bit last week and some
Mm-hmm.
of these newer social media platforms. Has there been anything that stood out to you looking at it from as a person who owns a brand, and you thought, hey, maybe I could use some of this in what I'm doing?
Uh, yeah, just it's kind of a balance because a lot of it is content, like people producing content, but there are people who are sort of branding themselves in certain ways. For me, like TikTok and Instagram, they're just a way for me to connect with people. And obviously, my brand is making small little games and showing the process along. It's kind of this niche little thing. And that's what I just try to convey on those platforms and stay true to myself. I mean, some of the kids that are blowing up, they're making these fun videos. I was able to make a video where I developed a little coronavirus video game. They inspired me a little bit to get crazy. And it's like this really cringy, diseased guy that you can stomp with a boot, and he has lips and he talks. So, but I mean,
Is that out now on your social media so we
it
can check it
is
out?
it is on my social media. Yeah, I was gonna release a part two. So, but basically, that's what I want my brand to be about is anything related to video game developer stuff. So,
That's awesome, man. And I think maybe I'm backpedaling a little bit, or maybe we're just coming full circle, but brings us to that back to that point that SEO and all the big things as you're trying to break through the noise is great, and I think if you're a serious brand and you're trying to grow, you got to consider those things. But there's also a huge opportunity, no matter where you're at, to cut through the clutter on some of these smaller, well, not even small platforms, but these frontiers, so to speak, of marketing and branding. Um, how can you make your brand stand out? Maybe you don't have the best brand name, but if you're clever enough, you can overcome those things, especially with all the new media types we have at our fingertips.
yeah, and it always seems like people are testing. They're trying new things. They're being creative, like you said, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And you just keep trying, moving along. That's what I've been doing with my own little company. And it's surprising sometimes, like what sticks and what doesn't. Like sometimes you think something's going to be doing really well and it doesn't. It's a very humbling process, this whole brand marketing stuff.
It is, especially when you fail and you have to come back at it and do it again. I think a lot of people get discouraged, but it's just one of those things you gotta keep going and you gotta see what works. Even the best marketers in the world are constantly A/B testing ads where they're putting one ad copy against another, one type of ad against another to see what works. Um, so don't get discouraged. No, if you're a marketer or just trying to put out good content. The last thing I want to talk about, Matt, is marketing, like looking into the far future. The reason I was thinking about this is Minority Report is trending on Netflix right now, and there's some really like creepy marketing in that movie. But I think there's also some truth in it, and it's about personalized marketing. We're already
Mhm.
seeing it. When you look at underwear on Amazon, you go to your office and there's an ad for underwear when your boss is trying to show you something on your computer.
Mhm.
So we're already falling victim to this stuff. But in Minority Report, if you haven't seen it, it's they scan your eyeballs to see who you are, and then it serves an ad with the person's name in the ad, and it says things like, "Hey, you look thirsty, Miller. You should have a Coca-Cola."
That is creepy. Jeez, yeah.
Well, do you think you're the programming technology guy? I'm a little scared, even as a marketer, about that. Do you think there's any reality or truth to that?
I mean, in terms of, so it's already kind of a little bit out of control just in like the mobile industry and just being on Facebook and all the data that they have for targeted ads and the amount of information that they gather, like when you're opening specific apps and when you're not. In terms of scanning you, there's nothing quite like that I know of, but I can see it. I can see those greedy little marketers get jumping on it in the near future if it was possible. They've already started like sort of these companies have popped up where they sell their services to get your ads within like actual games. Like so you might be a banner in GTA or just a billboard and it might change dynamically. And I'm not sure if GTA is doing it, but they're going to be experimenting more with that. And obviously, if you're in VR and it's more immersive, there's opportunity for that too, of having these targeted ads within there. In terms of scanning, I'm not sure. I think we have some time before they figure out the technology of reading your eyes or your face and saying how thirsty you are. So,
Yeah, I think the key to it all is finding a balance. If you're too creepy, people aren't going to respect the brand and they're going to have negative associations with your brand. But if you do it in a subtle and I guess a tasteful way, then generally the association is probably going to be positive with the brand that's doing it for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like, I'll see a lot of ads on social media, and they're obviously geared towards that platform. Like, it would be different on TikTok versus Instagram. Like, usually TikTok is somebody from TikTok dancing, and then they just have some brand that they're marketing. So I think there's a way to do it without getting too creepy. But I wouldn't, I wouldn't be surprised if humans try to do that in the near future.
I think you should always leave a podcast feeling
Ominous,
uneasy.
yeah, yeah,
So, I mean, I've been to some of these industry marketing conferences, and they've shown me technology where they can pinpoint a farmer out in his field searching for a product, and they know to serve them an ad for XYZ products. So, on that happy note, I hope your brand's doing well. Brand name is important.
hmm Yep, Me First Games. That's the new brand name.
Subtle pitch right there.
Yeah,
Go ahead and check Me First Games. Me first, Mom.
yeah, Me First.
And of course, as always, Zero1, the best podcast in the world. Make sure to check us out. We're on SoundCloud right now and YouTube. It's official there, and soon we'll be out everywhere where you get podcasts.
Yeah, and like or subscribe. Send us to your friends. We're a small podcast, and we're only just started growing.
Please, we will forever be in your debt if you like our content and share it with your friends. We would really appreciate that. And just so we know you're actually doing it, give us a shout out and tell us what's going on, what you want us to tackle. If you have any questions or want us to go into anything, I guess, a little more into depth.
Yeah, and just a preview, we are going to be answering some questions soon. So that's more to come.
All right, Miller. Well, as always, it's been a pleasure, my friend. We hope you guys have enjoyed listening, and have a blessed day.
Yep, well done, Harper, and bye-bye, guys.